The desert sun burned like fire across the North African sands in the summer of 1942, and the British Army teetered on the edge of collapse. Supplies were scarce, fuel dwindling, and German panzers prowled the horizon with deadly precision. Convoys were ambushed, trucks destroyed, and every mission felt like a death sentence. Yet, in the midst of chaos, one man, a rejected driver dismissed for being reckless and stubborn, refused to accept defeat. He saw possibility where others saw peril, and with nothing but grit, steel, and courage, he would transform fragile supply trucks into an unstoppable lifeline, keeping armies alive when all hope seemed lost. He had joined the army young, eager but clumsy, and quickly earned the label of troublemaker. In training, he pushed vehicles beyond limits, ignored orders, and was constantly reprimanded for taking risks others wouldn't dare. But the battlefield, unforgiving and merciless, demanded more than cautious obedience. It demanded ingenuity, courage, and audacity. When the North African campaign reached its darkest hour, he was given a convoy to drive, a seemingly impossible mission through narrow desert passes, under constant threat from German artillery and ambushes. The trucks were old, engines groaning, and steel thin. As he sat behind the wheel, clutch in his hands, heart pounding, he could feel the weight of every soldier depending on him. Failure was not an option. He began to innovate immediately, converting each truck with whatever materials were at hand. Scrap steel, sandbags, spare engine parts, turning vulnerable transport vehicles into makeshift armored beasts. Every modification was born from necessity: a welded panel to deflect machine gun fire, reinforced tires to survive shrapnel, oil-soaked canvas to obscure exhaust smoke. He worked with a small team of mechanics and fellow drivers, some equally dismissed, some too afraid to venture into enemy territory. Together, they created a convoy that could charge through fire where conventional wisdom said trucks would be destroyed. Each adjustment, each repair, was a gamble. Each mile of desert, a brush with death. The first mission tested everything. German tanks waited along the route, hidden in the dunes, artillery zeroed in on the narrow passes. Dust choked the engines, metal screeched under strain, and the air shimmered with heat and tension. Explosions shook the ground, throwing sand and shrapnel into the air. The convoy rattled forward, bullets pinging off the makeshift armor. The driver's hands trembled, sweat burned his eyes, but he forced himself to focus, calculating every maneuver, every turn, every throttle push. Time slowed in those moments. He could hear the wails of engines, the cries of soldiers, the crackle of distant shells. And yet, mile after mile, his convoys survived where others had fallen. What began as desperation transformed into awe-inspiring survival. Word of the rejected driver spread quickly. Soldiers whispered about the man who could deliver supplies where no one else dared, who could turn ordinary trucks into lifelines, and who seemed to possess the uncanny ability to anticipate enemy traps. High command, once skeptical, took notice, sending him larger convoys, more treacherous routes, and even more impossible missions. Each time, he faced the same heat, the same smoke, the same fear. But with every successful journey, he became a legend among men who knew the thin line between life and death in the desert. The ingenuity that had once marked him as reckless now marked him as indispensable. Ordinary vehicles became unstoppable supply lines. Ordinary men, extraordinary heroes. And yet, even in victory, he understood the fragile truth of war. Each convoy carried lives, hope, and the weight of nations. Each decision could mean salvation or annihilation. At night, when engines cooled and the desert stars shimmered like distant fires, he would reflect on what it meant to survive, to innovate, to lead in the face of relentless danger. His story was not just one of skill, but of courage. The courage to defy expectation, to act when others hesitated, and to transform rejection into a force that kept armies alive. The rejected driver became a living testament to human ingenuity, proving that even in the darkest hour, ordinary people could create miracles and change the course of history. The desert dawn was pale and unforgiving, a thin light stretching across endless dunes, and the convoy rumbled into a world that seemed designed to destroy it. Each truck groaned under the weight of supplies, every wheel kicking up clouds of sand that stung eyes and clogged engines. The driver's mind raced with calculations. Which paths offered cover, where the enemy might lie in wait, how to squeeze a convoy of fragile machines through terrain that punished the boldest of soldiers. His hands were blistered, arms aching, but every motion was precise, every command to the team deliberate, each decision a lifeline. Fear was constant, a living thing, whispering that one wrong move could spell death for hundreds of men depending on him. Yet within that fear, a strange clarity emerged, an understanding that survival demanded audacity, ingenuity, and relentless focus. He inspected every truck before departure, not as a mechanic by training, but as a man driven by necessity and desperation. He reinforced panels with scrap metal scavenged from abandoned depots, rigged sandbags across vulnerable engines, and improvised shutters over the radiator to protect against stray bullets. Some called it reckless, others called it genius. The driver knew that each modification was a gamble. If he miscalculated, the convoy would be shredded by German fire, engines disabled by sandstorms, or trucks lost to treacherous desert passes. Yet he worked with meticulous determination, oil-stained fingers tightening bolts, hammering rivets, and checking engines again and again, listening to the hums, groans, and rattles that spoke to a truck's soul. Every vehicle became an extension of his will, a fragile promise of life in a world that demanded death. The first stretch of desert was deceptively calm. Heat waves shimmered along the horizon, and the sun baked metal and sand alike. For a moment, it seemed as though the enemy had abandoned their pursuit, but experience taught him otherwise. Every dune, every shadow, every whisper of wind could conceal lurking danger. His eyes, trained to notice anomalies in the landscape, scanned tirelessly, detecting faint tire tracks, disturbed sand, the glint of hidden weapons. He signaled to the convoy with subtle hand gestures, a flick of the wrist or a tap of the horn, and each truck adjusted in perfect unison, sliding through the desert like a living organism. Coordination was survival. Misstep meant catastrophe. Behind the wheel, he felt the weight of lives pressing down, yet each successful maneuver reinforced his determination and the belief that his rejected ingenuity might just carry them all through. Then came the first real test, a narrow pass where German tanks and artillery had claimed dozens of convoys before. Smoke from distant explosions blurred the horizon, heat waves danced in the air, and the sand beneath the wheels was loose, treacherous. The convoy hesitated, engines straining, tires slipping on dunes, when the driver made a choice that could not be reversed. With a deep breath and a prayer whispered under his breath, he drove forward, urging each vehicle through gaps barely wider than the tires themselves. Bullets ricocheted off his makeshift armor, and shells exploded nearby, throwing up clouds of sand and debris. The men clung to their positions, hearts racing, sweat blinding their vision, but step by step, he led them through. The impossible became reality. The rejected driver had turned desperation into daring, transforming fear into the raw edge of survival. By the time the convoy reached relative safety, the men were exhausted, faces streaked with dust and sweat, hands trembling from tension and adrenaline. Yet there was awe in their eyes, at the driver who had refused to yield, who had seen solutions where others saw doom. That single passage through death had forged unity, confidence, and the recognition that ingenuity in the hands of a determined individual could defy the odds. Soldiers whispered his name, half in disbelief, half in reverence. To them, he was no longer a reckless outcast. He was a lifeline, a symbol of hope, and a proof that ordinary men armed with courage and creativity could create miracles even in the heart of a war designed to crush them. The days that followed were a relentless test of endurance, grit, and nerve. The convoy pressed deeper into enemy territory, every mile a knife's edge between life and annihilation. Heat scorched metal and flesh alike. Engines groaned under the strain of overloaded cargo. Each vibration a reminder that the trucks were barely holding together. Dust clung to every surface, filling lungs and searing eyes, but the driver refused to slow. Each decision carried the weight of countless lives, and hesitation could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Enemy reconnaissance planes shadowed the convoy from high above, their silhouettes stark against the sun, and the faint whine of distant artillery reminded them that the desert was alive with danger. Yet he drove as though guided by instinct, weaving through gullies, hugging ridges, and finding routes that defied conventional maps, paths no officer had dared to risk. Every night was a battle of a different kind. The men slept in shallow foxholes or under the skeletal frames of their trucks, while the driver remained vigilant, listening for the faintest creak of sand shifting or engine stutter that could signal disaster. His hands were blistered from constant steering, fingers stiff with fatigue, yet every adjustment mattered. He improvised repairs with a combination of intuition and mechanical knowledge, scavenged from months of trial and error. Broken axles were braced with scrap metal, leaking radiators patched with whatever oil-soaked cloth could be found, and engines that sputtered under sandstorms were coaxed back to life with patience and relentless attention. Each night, as he lay under a blanket of stars punctuated by the distant flare of artillery, doubts crept in. Questions of whether he had pushed too far, whether his rejected methods would hold. Yet those doubts were silenced by the quiet pride of seeing his convoy survive another day. The human element was just as fragile as the machines. Men argued, their tempers fraying from heat, hunger, and fear. Supplies were low, rations scarce, and morale hung by a thread. The driver became more than a navigator or mechanic. He became a silent anchor, a calm center in the storm. With a nod or a brief gesture, he coordinated the convoy, signaling each truck to adjust speed or spacing, preventing collisions and chaos. He saw the exhaustion etched on faces, the trembling hands of those tasked with unloading cargo, yet he pressed onward. Each successful maneuver through treacherous terrain became a lesson in leadership without authority, a display of courage that inspired obedience, not through command, but through example. In those moments, he was both ordinary and extraordinary, a man whose innovation and bravery allowed others to survive, even when everything around them threatened to fall apart. Then came the day when the desert revealed its cruelest trick. A sudden sandstorm roared in from the horizon, a wall of blinding dust that swallowed the convoy whole. Visibility dropped to near zero. Engines coughed and stalled in the choking haze. Tires spun uselessly in loose sand, and panic threatened to fracture the fragile unity he had forged. The driver's instincts had surged. He ordered trucks to maintain contact lights. Hand signals became lifelines, and every vehicle followed the precise patterns he dictated, like dancers moving to an invisible rhythm. The storm was merciless, whipping sand into faces, scouring skin raw, testing the limits of machines and men alike. And yet, through that chaos, he guided them, every pivot, every adjustment, a gamble that somehow worked. The convoy emerged battered but intact, a testament to foresight, courage, and an unyielding refusal to yield to circumstance. By the storm's end, a quiet reverence had settled over the convoy. They had survived impossible conditions, yet no medals awaited them, no parades, only the harsh sun and the endless stretch of desert ahead. The driver remained humble, focused on the next challenge, but in the eyes of those around him, he had become something more, a hero who transformed fear into action, chaos into order, and ordinary trucks into instruments of survival. Each day reinforced a singular truth: innovation and courage, even from those who others dismiss as failures, could create unstoppable force. The convoy was no longer just a line of supply trucks. It was a living monument to human resourcefulness, perseverance, and the extraordinary potential of those society had once overlooked. The convoy approached the most perilous stretch yet, a narrow mountain pass flanked by jagged cliffs where the enemy had laid traps and waited for any misstep. Every turn was a gamble. One wrong maneuver could send trucks tumbling into the abyss. The air was tense with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the hum of engines and the distant rumble of artillery. The driver's hands gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, eyes scanning every shadow for signs of ambush, every glint of metal that might betray a mine or sniper. Sweat ran down his temple, dust caked into his hair, Yet he moved with the precision of someone who had memorized every contour of the landscape, every curve of the road. Every decision here carried the weight of countless lives. Men, vehicles, and vital supplies, all balanced on his judgment. As the convoy inched forward, a sudden explosion erupted from above, a carefully hidden cache of explosives triggered by enemy observers. Sand, stone, and fire erupted in a deafening roar, throwing trucks off balance and sending men scrambling for cover. In that chaos, the driver reacted instinctively, weaving the lead truck between debris, barking signals to keep the line moving, and applying brakes only when the terrain demanded it. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations: momentum, weight, clearance, speed, all orchestrated under unbearable pressure. One misjudgment, one hesitation, could shatter everything he had fought to protect. And yet, despite the smoke, the dust, and the thunderous echoes of destruction, he pressed onward, a single mind in perfect harmony with the mechanical beasts he commanded. The convoy's trucks, overloaded with ammunition, food, and medical supplies, groaned under the strain. Tires screamed against rock, engines choked on dust, and sparks flew as metal scraped jagged cliff edges. Soldiers clung to their cargo, eyes wide with fear, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Some trucks faltered, wheels spinning helplessly in loose gravel, but the driver, improvising with the ingenuity that had earned him his rejected label, directed men to lash vehicles together, create makeshift tow systems, and use counterweights to balance precarious loads. Every innovation was born from desperation, yet each succeeded. The convoy transformed under his guidance, ordinary trucks becoming agile instruments of survival, able to defy the treacherous terrain that had been designed to halt them. Then, as they neared the summit, enemy fire erupted from the concealed positions along the cliffside. Bullets pinged off metal, smoke curled into the sky, and explosions sent clouds of dust and debris into the air. The driver's focus sharpened to a single point, every sense attuned to the rhythm of danger. He navigated the lead truck in tight, serpentine maneuvers, forcing enemy gunners to adjust constantly, reducing the accuracy of their fire. Following trucks mirrored his path, their drivers inspired by his calm decisiveness, their fear tempered by his command. It was a dance with death, mechanical and human in perfect, desperate sync, and against every expectation, they made it through. The convoy emerged on the far side battered and scarred, but alive, a testament to improvisation, courage, and unrelenting determination in the face of overwhelming odds. As the last truck cleared the pass, the men finally allowed themselves a breath, faces streaked with soot and sweat, hands shaking from adrenaline, yet eyes glimmering with quiet awe. They had survived what seemed impossible, guided by a man whose brilliance had been dismissed, whose courage had been underestimated. In that moment, the driver's rejected methods were no longer a source of shame. They were the lifeline that had turned ordinary machinery and fearful men into an unstoppable force. Each truck, scarred and dented, told a story of human ingenuity, bravery, and the extraordinary impact one determined individual could have on the course of events. The narrow pass, once a symbol of danger and despair, had been conquered by resourcefulness and courage, a vivid reminder that heroes often emerge from the most unlikely places. The convoy finally crested the ridge, sunlight breaking through the smoke and dust that had clung to the pass like a shroud. Below lay the valley, scarred but holding the promise of temporary safety, a fragile sanctuary after hours of near-constant terror. The trucks, battered and dented, limped forward, engines coughing clouds of black smoke, yet each vehicle carried its vital cargo, each one a testament to endurance and unyielding human ingenuity. Soldiers climbed out, shaking, their faces streaked with grime, some with minor wounds. Yet there was a collective sense of triumph in their eyes. They had survived what should well have been an annihilation, guided not by superior firepower, but by the brilliance and sheer will of a single rejected driver whose ingenuity had transformed chaos into salvation. He stepped down from the lead truck, boots caked in mud and dust, every muscle trembling from tension and exhaustion. Around him, men patted each other on the back, shared silent nods, and finally allowed themselves the smallest of smiles. For weeks, he had been dismissed, ridiculed for ideas that defied conventional doctrine. Yet here, in the aftermath of a successful, seemingly impossible operation, the same methods that earned him scorn had become a lifeline. The makeshift tow rigs, the rope and pulley systems, the precise timing of maneuvers, all improvised in the crucible of danger, had turned a vulnerable convoy into an armored spearhead capable of surviving ambush, landslide, and fire alike. Every fear he had carried, every whispered doubt, dissolved in the knowledge that ingenuity and courage had triumphed where brute force alone would have failed. The valley echoed with the groans of weary engines, the murmurs of men recounting close calls, and the distant echoes of artillery that still rumbled far behind them. The driver moved between the vehicles, checking for damage, encouraging men to hold on just a little longer, knowing full well that supply lines were only as strong as their weakest link. Every patch of rusted metal he had reinforced, every lever he had adjusted, every risky maneuver he had proposed now bore fruit in the form of lives saved, weapons delivered, and morale preserved. His mind was a catalog of calculated risks and improvisational solutions, each one proving that ordinary minds, when pushed to the brink, could achieve extraordinary results. As night fell, the convoy settled into a makeshift encampment, the trucks forming a defensive perimeter. Fires flickered against canvas and metal, illuminating faces etched with fatigue and awe. Men huddled close, sharing rations and whispered stories of near misses, all the while looking to the driver as the unspoken hero of the day. In quiet moments, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. The thin line between disaster and survival had been navigated with nothing but wits, courage, and indomitable resolve. The valley, once a potential grave, had been transformed into a staging ground for further operations, a testament to human adaptability under the harshest of pressures. In the days that followed, reports would trickle back to command, lauding the convoy's success, yet few would grasp the improvisational genius that had made it possible. Soldiers would tell the tale of a man whose rejection by official channels had not stifled his brilliance, but rather forced it into sharper focus, distilled under fire. The rejected driver had created a template for unstoppable supply lines, proving that ingenuity, courage, and determination often mattered more than rank or recognition. His story, though largely forgotten in official annals, remained alive in every soldier who survived, every supply delivered, and every improvised solution that carried them forward. The lesson etched in dust, sweat, and steel is timeless. History is shaped not only by generals or grand strategies, but by the quiet brilliance of ordinary people who refuse to accept limits imposed by others. Courage manifests not solely in combat, but in creative persistence, in daring to act when all eyes doubt you, in trusting intellect and instinct over rigid protocol. The convoy's passage through fire and rock is a testament that ingenuity, when paired with courage, can turn vulnerability into power, and that even a rejected individual can create an impact that echoes far beyond the battlefield. Humanity's capacity for problem-solving and bravery, often hidden in the most unlikely places, remains the ultimate engine of survival and triumph.